Susan, Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jamie.
Hey, how's it going, Jamie?
Solid-state batteries made with silicon as opposed to lithium metal. It's a rare case, which is why I'm excited to be joined by Bluecurrent, who've been gathering momentum with this chemistry for many years. I'm joined by Susan Stone, who's the new CEO of Bluecurrent, as well as Kevin Wujcik, who's the long-standing CTO, to talk through their journey so far and why this is our chemistry of the future. Given Susan's background, she also gives us her take on the current investment landscape, as well as her outlook for the future. And as always, they take a few of your questions from our battery community, as well as one from a former guest. We hope you enjoy. Thank you for joining. First of all, I'd like to welcome you, Susan. I know you joined the business only a few weeks ago, which I guess has been a whirlwind. So on that note, let's start with you and your journey kind of up to joining Bluecurrent and what inspired you to join as well.
Yeah, I love the chance to talk about it. It's been a whirlwind. You're not wrong, but it's been a really exciting whirlwind. So you're meeting me here on the beginning of my week 3 at Bluecurrent. So I'm really brand new here, but I'm just couldn't be more excited to be a part of this team and this journey. And where I'm coming from is a really, I think, a non-traditional background for, kind of getting to work on this team and, lead a company like Bluecurrent. I like to say I've gotten to sit in most of the seats around the startup table in my career. I started out as an investment banker, and then I was a VC investor. And by the way, as an investment banker and part of my VC days, I was investing in digital media. So things that are completely different than what we do today. And then I moved into an operating role as CEO of a material science company that spun out of MIT. So that's where I really got to spend time, one, as an operator, which is my absolute favorite thing to do. I love being an operator at startup companies. And 2, working with, really deep tech, transformational innovation, which just that concept gets me excited. And so I love working with people like Kevin, who have these amazing technological breakthroughs that we can help bring to market. And so why Bluecurrent? And that answer is really easy. I want to live in a world with a safe battery. I mean, that's it, right? I mean, that's what we're doing at Bluecurrent. That's what really was the headline that inspired me here. I have been really focused on climate tech for quite some time. I'm a true believer in energy transition. And I don't think I need to tell you that storage unlocks energy transition. I mean, without a doubt, we need storage. And for me, that means safe storage. And when I met Bluecurrent and when I met Kevin in particular, I got so excited about the mission. And so that's a big part of why I'm here. I also would note that this company has been around for 10 years. And so our technology is quite well developed. And we have been really strict about adhering to that mission of safety throughout the company's history. And so I'd love for Kevin to get an opportunity to tell you a little bit about his journey. He's been with the company a lot longer, but he's really kind of had the twists and turns along the way of having to follow safety as a first principles mission. It's not always so easy.
A nice introduction there, Kevin. A lot of pressure on you as to why Susan joined. She joined because of you.
I think he didn't have it. That's right. No other reason.
10 years is probably a lot to summarize in, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, whatever we have here. So I started working with batteries in 2011, and I started with our co-founder, Natash Balsara. Natash was my PhD advisor, and initially I was working on a completely different material set. I was working with lithium metal, which is an anode material, and sulfur cathodes. And interestingly, we were using polymer electrolytes in these cells, which was really a unique combination at the time. In the meantime, Natash had been working with one of his colleagues, Joe DeSimone, developing non-flammable fluorinated polymer electrolytes. And these were essentially liquids. And what was unique about them is that you could essentially, hold a flame to them and nothing would happen. So they had this idea of developing an inherently safe battery using this material. It was unique because it could dissolve lithium salts. It could be used as an electrolyte in a battery, and it was non-flammable. So I can remember at a ski trip in 2013, Natasha announcing to the group, we're going to start this company called Blue Current, and its mission is to develop an inherently safe battery, and we're going to use this non-flammable fluorinated polymer material. So Blue Current started, singularly focused with the mission of developing a safe battery, and that is still our mission today, but the materials are completely different. And the reason for that is because about 1 to 2 years into Blue Current working with these materials, we ran some safety tests where these fluorinated materials were combined with a lithium metal anode. And it turns out that even though they were non-flammable on their own, when combined with lithium metal, it was actually quite dangerous and quite catastrophic during some thermal abuse tests. So meanwhile, I'm still at UC Berkeley getting my PhD, and there was a postdoc in Natasha's group. Her name is Irene. Irene was developing these composite materials where we were taking polymer electrolytes and combining them with inorganic electrolytes, so things like sulfidic glass and sulfidic ceramics. The whole idea was to develop a material that was elastic and flexible the way that polymer was, but higher in conductivity in terms of achieving what a glass or ceramic material can achieve. Historically, electrolytes that are solid have either been polymers or glass ceramics. The polymers they're really flexible, they're adhesive, they're great, but they have low conductivities at room temperature. Glass ceramic materials are on the opposite side of things. They have high conductivities, but really poor mechanical properties. So there was this idea to develop composites, where we were essentially combining the two materials. When Blue Current, had these safety tests kind of go sideways, what ended up happening is the company licensed this composite material that was being developed in Natasha's lab. So they licensed that material. I had actually been working with the material, helping with some characterization, so I had some familiarity with it. And this was around 2016. So Blue Current pivoted to solid state in 2016. I graduated and went to Ford Motor Company in 2018. So a little, extra twist to the story. So I go to Ford. I'm there for about a year and a half. Then I get a call from Natasha one day, and he says, we have a position that's opening up to lead the team at Blue Current. Would you be interested in moving back to California? I thought he was calling to ask for me to return my laptop because we were still working on a book chapter together. Anyway, so I make the trip out to California. He tells me about the materials and how they had continued to advance the technology. He showed me some pictures of how this material was flexible, but also really high in conductivity. And I was just really sold on the materials. And I think that, why I joined Blue Current, one was the technology. And it's really unique to have a material that is both high in conductivity, but also flexible, elastic, and adhesive. So I thought that was really, really powerful. And then two was the people. And, I obviously I had a relationship with Natasha, but I also kind of knew some of the team working at the company. And I was just really, really impressed by what they've been doing. So that's a little bit about my journey. And, I can tell you a little bit more about the technology today, because there was another pivot in there where we switched from lithium metal to silicon. So, yeah.
And now, Jamie, when I'm talking about it, everything is driven by the safety mission. And that is, to me, that's so exciting and just really a different approach. And that's what Kevin and the team have been working on. So I love it.
I think, the safety element is key to adoption. Unfortunately, you see headlines of battery fires, and we've had different guests on the show talking about battery safety. And solid state answered a lot of those safety questions. But of course, it's been around for a long time, the technology, but it's just so difficult to get it right, the different elements, and ultimately scale. And we've had some really interesting silicon anode businesses on the podcast, and we've had other solid state businesses that focus on lithium metal. And for the first time, we're talking about silicon solid state. And I was actually watching your appearance at the Solid State Summit in Chicago, Kevin, and I believe pretty much everybody there was solid state with a lithium metal anode, and I think you were maybe one of two that had silicon. So talk us through that transition and the reason, why silicon, and why are the people not, or are the businesses not following suit?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think historically, when we think back to, why did solid-state battery research really began and what was the focus, even going back decades ago. I don't mean to generalize, but I think historically, one of the main focuses for solid-state electrolytes, if not the main focus, has been to enable lithium metal by preventing lithium metal dendrite growth. Dendrite growth, as I'm sure a lot of the viewers know, it's what happens when you're cycling a lithium metal battery. It's really difficult to actually plate lithium uniformly on the anode. And so instead what happens is you have these structures, they grow across the cell, they're called dendrites, and lithium metal essentially grows from the anode to the cathode and eventually short circuits the cell. And solid-state electrolytes for a long time have been researched as a way to prevent that problem from happening. So preventing dendrite formation and also mitigating dendrite growth. So I think that the two have almost become synonymous with each other for a long time. There are technologies out there where lithium metal is being paired with a liquid, but I think the hope for a while has been that lithium metal can be enabled by solid-state electrolytes that can, essentially prevent dendrite formation. I think people are starting to come around to the idea of using silicon in a solid-state cell. We're seeing more and more research in the space. One of the challenges, though, that I think has probably turned people away for a long time, silicon is this amazing material. Silicon stores 10 times more lithium per gram compared to graphite. So it is amazingly energy dense. The challenge is that it expands and contracts during cycling. So as it lithiates, it can expand by up to 300% of its volume. This creates a lot of issues in liquid electrolyte cells. There's this continuous reactivity between silicon and the liquid electrolyte. In a solid state cell, I think the challenge that has probably turned people away for a while is if you have a fully dry electrolyte that's not wetting your interface of the silicon active material particles, how do you maintain good contact with the silicon active material particle during cycling and while silicon is expanding and contracting? We found ourselves in a sort of a unique area within solid state, even back in 2016, having a focus of composites where you have a high conductivity, but something that is flexible and elastic and then has good adhesion. Initially, the focus of the company was to enable lithium metal, but then after a couple of years, we realized, well, wait a second, we can actually use this with silicon. And that problem that I mentioned about maintaining a good interface with silicon active material, we can solve that challenge by using these composite materials that allow silicon to essentially breathe and expand and contract while maintaining good contact. So I think that we're starting to see more interest in the silicon solid-state battery space, but there is this requirement that you have the right material set. And I think at Blue Current, we feel like we have the right material approach to enable it. So the other thing I'd say is, as Susan mentioned, safety has always been a critical part of the company's focus. And lithium metal is this amazingly energy dense material, but compared to silicon, there are some challenges in terms of safety. We know lithium metal can melt at 180 degrees Celsius. It's super reactive with water and oxygen and nitrogen. So we also think that switching to silicon gives you something that's inherently safer. But it does require the right material set to enable it. And so we feel like we have that. So it's an exciting time. I think like more and more in the academic world, we're seeing more and more research starting to focus on silicon. So my hope is that by this time next year at the Battery Summit, maybe we'll be able to double the number of talks regarding silicon. We'll see.
If anybody wasn't there or hasn't seen your talk, I'd highly recommend it. You go into a lot of detail on cycle life and scalability and things like that. Rather than delving too much detail into that today, talking about why silicon, I'd be interested to talk about the application areas, because I think that's been an interesting dynamic in the market recently in terms of what's driving our next chemistries. So, with the kind of EV stalling a little bit, is EV toll going to be a thing, or is it just going to be kind of something that's just really cool? So from your perspective, kind of what application areas are you looking at for this chemistry, and what areas do you think it will unlock as well that maybe kind of other maybe lithium metal solid state can't?
Well, and I'll start on that one, Kevin, and then please jump in with all of your brilliant ideas too. I think I like to think about our journey in, kind of phases. And so when I think about early applications, the application set is a little narrower. We are about to commission our pilot line. Kevin will talk a little bit about that later. And that will enable us to share samples with a lot of our customer partners at relatively high volume. Right now, we're still sharing R&D cells and getting great results. But to start, one of the things that really has to happen here, once we with our partners, get into full-scale production, is, really an entire ecosystem needs to come up together. And so in early days, we are looking for applications where energy density and safety, really outweigh just a cost decision. And that's true for probably any early technology coming online. You got to really find the pockets where the things that you bring to the table are most highly valued. And for us, that is energy density within, a relatively small form factor. And also, that what we think of as, we're a truly inherently safe battery. So, we are certainly working towards transportation automotive. That is a big deal for us. And that's where, I would say a substantial amount of our customer engagements are. But we're working on other applications as well. There are some really nice applications for stationary storage where just an unsafe, potentially fire hazard battery cannot be tolerated. And we're looking at some smaller form factor consumer electronics applications as well for the same reasons. We can really optimize there for a safety and for energy density. I would say over time, one of the things that we both love about silicon is it's earth abundant, it's safe, the materials that we use are not highly engineered. And so that gives us a path to having all three: energy density, low cost, and safety. And then, we could add that, we kind of have other specs met there too. So over time, it's hard to imagine an application where we couldn't ultimately apply this technology. But we really are starting with the pockets where we can provide that safety and energy density first. Kevin, what do you think? What would you add to that?
I really don't have much to add. I'm really impressed, Susan. Yeah, it's hard to believe it's only week 3.
And you taught me well.
Yeah, and I would just sort of highlight the point, Jamie. I think that what we always say is, when we talk about battery advancements, most of the time, energy density is the name of the game, right? Like, how much energy can we put into as small of a space as possible, or into as small of a mass as possible? And inherently, the technologies can just become more and more dangerous. If you're not changing the materials, you're putting more energy into a smaller space. What can go wrong is going to be essentially just expected to be worse. So we feel like there has to be this categorical shift in the materials that are inside of the cell, such that you can actually increase energy density without sacrificing safety. So everything Susan mentioned, there's a ton of applications where it would really open doors if you can do that. And, one of the things that we talk about is what you can do on board a vehicle in terms of reducing the size of, the thermal management system and sort of like the, all of the onboard equipment and tools and sort of the design of the pack needed to prevent thermal runaway and propagation of cell failure. So, by having a material set that allows you to increase energy density without sacrificing safety, you're opening doors to a lot of different technologies, making all of those different systems more efficient.
Just on application areas, I know something that you talked about at the summit was how the pressures can vary, of course, in different application areas. In terms of pressure, I'm not a scientist, so I don't understand it at a deep level, but when dealing with silicon, is it easier to vary pressures versus lithium metal?
That's a great question. The scientist in me is going to prevent myself from just like directly answering it, because I think that it really depends. But I will say this. So the way that a lithium metal cell cycles is that you have all of the lithium from the cathode shuffled to your anode interface, and all of the expansion and contraction of the anode occurs at that two-dimensional interface. And what that means is that you have actually a significant volume expansion at the interface of the separator. In our case with silicon, we have lithium go from the cathode and into the anode. The anode is a composite, and we have silicon particles in the composite, which means that volume expansion and contraction is occurring in 3 dimensions. So the effective strain at the interface with your electrolyte is essentially lower. You're cycling probably 20 to 25 microns of lithium in a lithium metal cell, and that 20 to 25 microns is that change is all happening at the separator interface, whereas for us, it's occurring in this 3-dimensional structure and, between a lot of different silicon particles. So really what I'm trying to say is the effective strain is lower in our case, which means that the amount of pressure you need, it can essentially be more manageable because you can use materials within the composite to maintain better adhesion because your effective strain is lower. But it really is a complicated topic.
It's a 1-hour podcast by itself, isn't it? So apologies for chucking that question at you. A question for both of you here. So first of all, you celebrated 10 years in the summer. Something that a lot of battery companies can only dream of in terms of having that amount of runway, and even businesses with very viable technologies. So first of all, Kevin, question for you. What have been the biggest challenges over the years to kind of get you to this point? And then Susan, for you, what does the future look like, and what are you most excited about? I know a bit about your plans, but it'd be good to expand on some of those. So Kevin, let's talk about
Yeah, I think there have been technical challenges. There's also just organizational challenges in terms of how you scale a company, and not to mention, COVID and how that sort of transformed what we were doing and how we were working at the time. I think that one of the technical challenges was when we started focusing on silicon in 2018. When we talk about silicon, really what we mean is it could be, pure silicon, it could be silicon oxide, silicon carbon, silicon alloy materials, combinations with graphite, combinations with other silicon materials. There's highly engineered silicon, there's low engineered. There's this whole world of materials. And when we started working on this back in 2018, we were a 7-person company, and we were basically asking ourselves, how do we go about analyzing what the right materials are? And we just had to take sort of this slow but methodical approach to understanding what are the best silicon active materials for a solid state battery. One of the challenges is that all of these materials have been designed for liquids. So you're taking them and you're trying to adapt them into a fully dry solid state cell. And that's not always the easiest thing to do, right? It's if materials are designed for a certain electrolyte, they're not necessarily going to work in the solid state cell. So that's been a challenge, right? It's we can't boil the ocean, as they say, in terms of looking at all these materials, and we have a small team. So really, what we've had to do is just rely on. We have an amazing array of characterization tools here, both electrochemical but also analytical tools and microscopes. SEM and XRD, with a long list, and using these tools to understand how do we best design a solid state anode with a silicon active material, so that we have sort of a rational way of thinking and developing the materials. But that was definitely a big one. And then of course, tuning the solid electrolyte composition to allow for silicon to expand and contract while still maintaining good adhesion, utilizing a lot of our previous work with lithium metal and composites, but sort of then gearing it towards composite anodes. So those are just a couple technical ones. And then, I think scaling a technology, there's always challenges going from lab to commercialization and pilot. And, that's a big part of our journey right now. It's getting the pilot line up. Anyway, that's just a few that come to mind.
Well, I get the other half of the coin on this question, which is, it sounds like I get to talk about our future and the opportunities, which are, I would say, probably more fun to talk about than the challenges. They usually are. And, I kind of would start where you started, Jamie. The fact that this company has been working on this technology for 10 years and has been supported by a a relatively concise group of investors who believe in this technology, that was a big deal for me. And that was, one of the things that got me excited here. I think, there's a lot of support from our board and investors up to this date to really keep the company small and focus on getting the technology right before we scaled. And so we are now at the magic moment where we had the confidence, probably a year and a half ago to hit go on ordering our equipment and building out our pilot line. And we have the results that we needed and the data that backs that so that we can bring up that pilot line here. If everything goes according to timelines, it'll come up in the first quarter. I see you smiling, Jamie. You know how that goes when you're awaiting permitting and construction and equipment to be installed. But fingers crossed, it'll come up here in Q1. And I have to mention our VP of Advanced Manufacturing, Yutaka Wakai, is just truly incredible. And it is through him that I have such high confidence that this line is going to come up and that it's going to yield the way that we want it to, once we get it all commissioned and calibrated. So very excited for that. And, that really is an unlock point for us. We'll be able to make 2 amp hour cells off of that line. We already do have some customers and partners to whom we owe cells as soon as that line comes up. But we're really excited about expanding that group and really being able to work with lots of folks across those application sets that we talked about. So we kind of have a really step-by-step approach here, but it's really time to expand. So our next step in the future is to commission that pilot line and start getting those samples out to our customers, and really, in my mind, increase the speed of that flywheel where we're working with our partners, we're talking to them, we are iterating on what are the specific goals that they need us to meet in order to meet their thresholds. And so I think one of the things, again, that attracted me here and that gets me excited about our pilot line and Yutaka's approach is that we want to use industry standard equipment that is already used by our partners and that they're familiar with. And, I think that's a really critical unlock for the ultimate expansion of this technology and for manufacturing it around the world. I think it's really difficult to ask partners to trust new equipment, especially if it's been customized for us. And so that's one of the things we're really proud of, is that our manufacturing is ultimately very, very similar to existing lithium ion. We can reuse a lot of the equipment, and that's what we're going to be using in our pilot line so that we can really show that proof point to our partners. Ultimately, I think we will have I don't think we need to do full scale manufacturing at this company. I think we will have, a more linear pilot too, that we hope we can produce both samples and process development for our manufacturing partners, but also, produce some sales in small volume off of that line in the future. But I truly want to focus on our step-by-step, and next step is pilot 1 in Q1, and that's what we're focused on today and what we're most excited about.
Exciting times, and high praise for your new colleague there as well. This means that you can share the podcast with them and say, "Look, I love you. We believe in you." No, it's obviously a pivotal moment, and 10 years into the journey. I've been watching the headlines, and yeah, it's an exciting time for you all down there at Haywards. Susan, a question for you, and a conversation I have with a lot of leaders in the space at the moment is the investor landscape. And I think particularly with your background, you might be able to shed some light here. So what is your assessment and overview of the investment landscape right now in the US, and what's your outlook as well?
I mean, look, it's been a tough couple of years, right? I think that's, ask anyone. I think you could stop someone on the street and ask them how it's been for just, VC overall, and then narrow it to, kind of climate tech, energy, and deep tech. And it's been grim, I would say. I think the exuberant days of, very, very low interest rates are gone for now. And so that's really meant for a reshuffling and a reprioritization particularly for the folks who invest risk capital. So, you think of traditional VCs, growth equity folks, they're really recalibrating their portfolios and recalibrating what makes sense for them. Has been lovely that we've started to see rates come down. I think that is going to start to, get things moving again. So I'm very hopeful that risk capital comes back to the table. But for the most part, our focus today has been on strategic partnerships, and that means strategic investment. We also do have, like I mentioned before, very, very strong support from our existing investors. So I think, if you're a other company, a competitor of ours or a partner of ours working in this space, and you're looking for investment dollars, I do think it is tough in the traditional VC space today, and I think it's going to remain tough for a little bit. I wish I had a crystal ball and could tell you when I think that'll end, but it will. It inevitably, the cycles do have beginnings and ends, and I think those folks will come back to the table, and especially for companies like ours that have a little bit of a different approach. But that said, we see really, really strong interest still from many strategic investors and partners around the world. And Kevin mentioned at the beginning of this conversation that there's just been so much interest still in industry, especially in automotive, for solid state, and that hasn't waned. And so we're really just kind of focused on who's focused on us. And that's, for us right now, that's strategic investors. And it'll change, but right now that's who's interested in companies like Blue Current today.
It's obviously an impossible question in terms of the outlook, but someone with your experience, it's reassuring to hear that things are hopefully looking better in the future. To finish off, got a few questions from the community. We put a post out that you were joining us on the show, and we've got a few questions, and then finally a question from a former guest. So the first one is, why is this our chemistry of the future?
Oh, that's a great question. I'll turn that one to Susan. No, I'm kidding.
I forgot to tell you guys I'm a chemist. I'm just kidding.
I kind of mentioned it earlier, Jamie, but finding a material set where you can increase energy density without sacrificing safety, I think it's critical for batteries. It's sort of an existential thing. We feel like silicon is unique in its ability to do that, but specifically silicon in a fully dry solid electrolyte system where you do not have any liquid electrolyte present. That is really unique. I think one of the most exciting things for us, and that we discovered this back in 2018, if you put silicon in a fully dry electrolyte system, you can enable really, really high silicon contents in the anode. This is something that's really challenging to do with liquid electrolytes. That's why there are so many startup companies, research groups focused on developing advanced silicon materials that work in liquids. But what we like to say is, if you had an option today, if you could go back in time and say, yes, we have 3 to 4 decades work developing liquid electrolyte cells, but if you had an option today of taking silicon and putting it in a liquid versus putting it in a fully dry solid, which is the right electrolyte? And we would argue that a fully dry solid electrolyte is the right electrolyte to enable high silicon contents. So I think that has real staying power. Are there material science challenges that have to be resolved so that we can enable, low pressure and extremely high silicon contents? Like, yes, but when you think about, developing a battery that's going to be here for decades to come, you have to start with the right philosophy about the materials. And for us, that means having a safe electrolyte, a safe cell, but also an electrolyte that's going to enable really, really high energy densities and really high silicon contents. So that's why we believe this is the chemistry that's going to be here for decades, because it can enable both high energy density as well as safety. And we think that's really unique. The other thing I would say about solid state more generally and fully dry electrolytes more generally, it can enable active materials that would not traditionally work with liquids. Silicon is a great example, but another could be sulfur in the cathode. So with solid state and using dry electrolytes, you can enable these really high energy density materials. So I think that's why this will have staying power for decades to come.
Thank you, Kevin. The second question, you've already answered. It was around the kind of expansion of your pilot line and facility. So you've already answered that one. And the final one was, you kind of touched upon earlier, but which industries or application areas will benefit the most from your technology?
Oh, will benefit the most. That's tough. I guess the real question is, how do you measure that? Look, I think we really, with this safe solid state silicon-based battery, we really do have an opportunity to transform a lot of electronic devices. And when you really open up that brainstorming space of, what would you do with the battery if it truly were inherently safe? I think Kevin mentioned it earlier, kind of an easy one to think of is just the impact of a safe battery like this on BEVs. And there's just so much weight and design and manufacturing complexity that goes into the thermal management systems, into the firewalling. That I think is a really unique opportunity for a safe solid state battery to be transformational. And I don't want to make it sound like that, expand that out to other applications. I think once you start thinking through what could you do if you didn't have to have a heavy duty thermal management system paired with your battery, the opportunity for transformation gets pretty endless. But that one really in automotive, and I have to admit, I'm a proud owner of a Rivian that I just love. And so I can imagine, how much better would this vehicle be if it had a really safe, inherently safe battery that didn't have to have all of, the bells and whistles and extras to keep us safe. So that's where my mind goes. But truly, it is just a broad open space of, where we can be impactful.
Very good. And a final question from a former guest. I can confirm this isn't the guest from the last podcast, the most recent one. So you can't guess who it is. It's completely random. You kind of answered this question before, Susan. We kind of opened up why you joined the space, and Kevin being your inspiration is why. So maybe this is more directed to you, Kevin. What originally got you involved in the battery space, and what advice would you give for someone that is just starting out in this industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I can tell you a little bit about, so before I worked in batteries in 2011, I was an undergraduate at Drexel University, university in Philadelphia, and I just got really, really into research. I was sort of a fanatic, to be honest, but I was actually working in the fuel cell space. I had an internship at a fuel cell startup company developing bipolar plates that were corrosion resistant. And then I worked in a lab at Drexel where we were developing fuel cell electrodes. I was just really, really interested in alternative energy and this idea that you could literally impact the environment and society by developing materials in a lab, and actually seeing that come to fruition, having experience in a startup company. By the way, this is when 2007, 2008, I think that the cost of a barrel of oil at the time was the highest it had ever been, maybe still to this day. So that's really kind of what drew me to the space. I was fascinated by the materials and just this ability to, as a chemical engineer, impact the world with the work I was doing in lab space. Just seemed really exciting. The advice I would give to folks starting in the industry, what I like to tell folks that start here is there's a famous quote in jazz. I think it's Miles Davis. Don't quote me on this because I'm not actually a jazz musician by any means or a fanatic, but you have to learn the rules before you break them. And what you learn in the classroom, what you learn in a lab space, like you have to fundamentally know electrochemistry, mass transport, material science, chemistry. You really have to learn the fundamentals so that once you start actually going and innovating, you can refer back to what you learned so that like what you're doing actually makes sense thermodynamically, and so that you have sort of a rationale for how you're solving material science challenges. So I think that just really being driven to learn, in the classroom and also in the lab space is really, really critical. And then the second thing I would say is just be relentless in what your goals are and what your missions are. And I think that, for me, like I've always been interested in alternative energy. And yeah, there have been trying times, whether it's, in grad school or at Blue Current or, in undergrad, but you just always have to remind yourself of what your original mission was and just to stay focused on that. And anyway, those are just two ideas, but I'm sure Susan could probably add more.
Well, I guess for the non-technical folks that want to enter the space, I can probably add my 2 cents. I think, because you guys heard me earlier talk about my career has been this kind of long and winding journey, I do talk to a lot of folks who want to get into climate and get into energy transition and are coming from other industries. Obviously non-technical folks who are talking to me. I think personally the best way to break into new industries is to find companies where you have a really good culture fit, because I think that's the place where you can make the biggest impact and where you can really be collaborative with your colleagues and learn. And that is, I think, a difficult thing to do sometimes when you're so anxious to make a change and get into an industry and, you're trying to get a break. And, it's really hard to be, I think Kevin Natash said to us a couple of weeks ago, it's hard to tell if you're a beggar or a chooser, which I hadn't heard anyone say that before and I loved it. But yeah, it's hard to decide if you're a beggar or a chooser. And my advice is on culture, be a chooser, even if it means you might turn down what seems like your opportunity to break into the industry. You're going to learn the most and have the most impact if you join a culture that suits what works well for you. And so I didn't get a chance to say that about Blue Current, but it's probably obvious that that is also a big reason that I joined Blue Current, because we have just such a collegial, collaborative, and mission-driven culture that was a great fit for me.
A great place to end. The person who asked that question is non-technical. So a good, I think.
I'm glad I tuned it over to Susan.
But now it's really, because I work with a lot of people who are just entering the industry and, not sure whether to stay in academia or move into industry, and, super good advice. I think it's been a good dynamic today having you both on the show. So, thank you both very much. I've been really keen to bring Blue Current onto the show for a while, particularly in solid state silicon. So, thank you both very much. Good luck for the pilot line in Q1, and good luck, Susan, with your young journey. Only been there for 3 weeks, so good luck and thank you again.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks, Jamie.